Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The holiday festivities are well behind us. The new year is in full swing. It's time to get to work as a big 2025 lies ahead for yours truly, delivering what I do best, serving up unedited, unapologetic, and entertaining sports talk as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. 18 weeks in the NFL seems to go by in a breeze. Goes by in a blink of an eye when you think about it. When you get to Labor Day weekend, right after that, that's when the season begins, that Thursday night, and then you usher in the first weekend of the NFL. You have to go through September, obviously October with baseball and college football sprinkled in. And when you get to the latter part of October with the NBA, NHL, you still have to go through November. Thanksgiving, the extravaganza that the NFL always is. Past that into December, through holiday parties, shopping, Christmas carols, Mariah Carey and her ubiquitous Christmas song. And then you get to Christmas, New Year's, and then yesterday we put a lid on the 2024 NFL season. And I have to say, mercifully, thank God it's over. I know the NFL will never, ever in a billion years say it, but you have to really think if you're a diehard sports fan, a good and obviously tried and true NFL fan, that was probably as bad of an NFL season as you've experienced. And I don't want to hear about your fantasy teams. I don't want to hear about your gambling. I don't want to hear about whatever parlays and props and whatever online betting that you may do. And if you happen to go that route, God bless you. Not this guy. But as far as a season overall where you had a third of the league had more than 10 losses, when you had absolutely zero drama down the stretch of the season, when you had no true pennant race. And yes, we could talk about Minnesota and Detroit last night, but that wasn't a win-or-go-home scenario. And as it was, a lot of people thought in their gut that the Lions would win. And even though it was nip and tuck throughout for the two NFC North foes in the Vikings and Lions, but I would think that the NFL fan knew that the Lions were going to come out victorious, knowing that they would have a bye, that they could rest up that weary defense and get themselves primed for a Super Bowl run that they have never experienced. And even though last year they were this close in San Francisco, but now the road to New Orleans goes through Detroit. But other than that, you really had nothing in this NFL season that you could really hang your hat on to say, wow, there's signature moments or signature games or just a race to the very end, whether it was teams trying to jockey for that seventh and final playoff spot in the AFC, NFC. You didn't get any of that. And the NFL will say otherwise. The ratings went through the roof. Look what happened on Christmas Day with Netflix and how successful we were. We demolished the NBA, which the NFL, even on its worst day, will do better than anything that the NBA, NHL, or Major League Baseball could ever produce. So that's not going out on a limb if you're the NFL. So you could brag and boast, and they are, as I say all the time, the impenetrable shield. Because they are bulletproof. Doesn't matter what TV event is on, the NFL will just spit it out and regurgitate while chewing on it before saying, out of here. Because they are the NFL. So with all that being said, thank God the season is over. It was an abomination. There isn't anything that I could draw that I could say, wow, that was a season that we're going to remember from here to eternity. And I get it that you can't say that for a lot of other leagues. It's not as if you're going to say, well, Major League Baseball didn't have that type of season, or the NBA, or same for the National Hockey League. Understood. But like I mentioned, NFL is 18 weeks. Every Sunday or Thursday or Friday or Saturday or other day than any other day but Tuesday, when you think about it this past season, and it still didn't manufacture any type of intrigue, any type of drama that we could, at least to the bitter end, look at and say, wow, that was riveting, that was compelling. Not in the least. So let me put that aside and get to what's going on, because again, what we witnessed here over the last 3 days, or really 2 days, was not anything to write home about. And even though they had the AFC North represent there on Saturday, the Ravens went going away 35-10, no shock there. And even Lamar Jackson said that we still have a lot of work to do, which is good on his part. But as I've said a zillion times over, and I'll talk more about this on Thursday's podcast when I get into the storylines and the wild card weekend. But for Lamar Jackson, he could put up all these numbers in October, November, and December. But let me see this in January, and dare I even say February. And that is it. That is all. That is that when it comes to the Ravens. So they have the 3 seed, and they have the first round home field advantage that they took away from the Steelers. Or maybe the Steelers happened to just say, we don't really want it, considering 4 weeks ago they were 10-3, 2 games ahead of the Ravens in the AFC North. And what did they do? They hit the skids to where they go into the postseason on a 4-game losing streak, losing in Philadelphia, losing in Baltimore, and losing at home to Kansas City and Cincinnati. And should I even talk about the game there on Saturday night? What is there to discuss? The offense was slow out of the gate as always. I understand that there were a ton of drops there by the receivers, where either Pat Freiermuth or even George Pickens, who you have to wonder whether or not you could get this kid's head on straight, because for whatever the reason, he's the type of guy that he's a front-running player. When things are going great and things are going well, he likes to point first downs and yuck it up and dance, etc. But boy, when things go awry, when things go just a little bit left or right, it's as if the sky is falling in George Pickens' world, and it is just really rough to watch if you're a Steeler fan. But even with that, they were unable to at least snap this 3-game winning streak to go into the postseason feeling a little bit better about themselves as they conclude their season 10-7. And oh, by the way, with the Chargers winning in Vegas yesterday, where are the Steelers going in their first round matchup? No, not to Houston, as a lot of people may have thought going into yesterday's game, or really into Saturday, because you figured if the Steelers would have won, they would have been automatically going to Houston. No, they're going to Baltimore. So Ravens, Steelers, for a 3rd time this year, they split the first 2 games. Obviously, during this 4-game losing streak, they lost in the middle of that in Baltimore. So now you're going to have another reacquaintance with these 2 organizations, these 2 head coaches, and Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh. And let's see how the Ravens-Steeler matchup will come about Saturday night, which will be on Amazon Prime. So there goes the NFL again, sinking their teeth into all these different platforms and streaming services where they have all these mouths to feed. But again, we'll talk more about this matchup and everything when it comes to Wild Card Weekend on Thursday. But then when you got into yesterday, in the 1 o'clock hour, you had Tampa, who was in a bit of a scare against the New Orleans Saints, but they were able to prevail late. Saints actually had a 16-6, 10-point lead and had a lead going into the 4th quarter before the Buccaneers were able to right their ship and go into the postseason with another NFC South championship under their belt. And with the Carolina Panthers beating Atlanta, so even if the Buccaneers did lose by the Falcons losing to the Panthers, and another good performance there by Bryce Young, so something to build on there if you're a Panther fan. But with Michael Penix, who had a good game there yesterday with 3 touchdowns, did throw a pick. But Kirk Cousins, you could pretty much say he is all but gone there in Atlanta. What a just wasteful signing if you're Arthur Blank. And I get it that they needed a quarterback, but with Penix there and they drafted him and having $100 million guaranteed to a guy who didn't even finish out the season. And mind you, this Falcon team started off 6-3 and were just a complete no-show over the last 8 games of the season, as evidenced by their 2-7 record. Or let me take that back, 2-6 record. Just a disgraceful ending to what was a promising start to a Falcon season. So now you have Tampa Bay going into the playoffs, and then in the 425 window yesterday with the Bengals winning, and boy, would another week, and maybe in another 2, 3, 4 years when the NFL will expand to 18 games, that's where the Bengals wish they could have had another week to survive, because if that was the case, they probably would have made it into the postseason. Based on their 5-game winning streak to end the year, punctuated by the win in Pittsburgh there on Saturday night. But for the Bengals, they were praying and hoping that both the Miami Dolphins and the Denver Broncos were to lose so that the Bengals would sneak in through the back door into the AFC playoff picture. Now, what you saw at MetLife with the Dolphins, when you have Tyler Huntley as your quarterback and the Jets, a last hurrah, quite possibly for one Aaron Rodgers, the Jets were able to prevail 32-20 and foiled any playoff hope for the Dolphins, because they did have a tiebreak advantage over Cincinnati. But with the events in the Mile High City, with Bo Nix having a big game, throwing for over 300 yards, and a 38-0 shutout of the Kansas City Chiefs, who rested everybody to give pretty much them a 3-week vacation, or 2.5 weeks, depending on how you look at it, because their last game was on Christmas. And for them to have this long extended stretch to where they could regroup and even heal to the point where they're going to be all systems go a week from this coming weekend, whether it be Saturday night or Sunday late afternoon into the evening in Kansas City, where they're going to go for a three-peat. And for Denver, they were able to secure a playoff spot the first time they made it into the postseason since they won a Super Bowl back in 2015. And for the Bengals and Dolphins, sayonara to a season which obviously had big expectations. Miami, especially with what they did over the last couple of years, making it into the playoffs but not having any success. And the Bengals now missed the playoffs 2 years in a row after reaching the Super Bowl 3 years in a row, and the year after that making it to an AFC Championship game, again falling short in Kansas City. And with that, the Dolphins now have to deal with a one Tyreek Hill, as his comments in the postgame pretty much saying that this is the first time I missed the postseason in my career, and I have to think about what's best for me and my family, and I'm out, and it was a good time, but I'm not here for a long time, or so it seems. But with Hill, he still has a lot of money, and whatever the Dolphins do, they're going to have to take a cap hit to some degree. To the extent, I don't know. Obviously, I don't have the contract or any of the numbers that would be in front of me moving forward as far as Tyreek Hill in a Dolphin uniform. But who knows? Has he played his last game in Miami, considering that they underachieved? Granted that they didn't have their quarterback for the early to the middle part of the season, and upon his return, played okay, but nothing great. And then obviously with the hip injury, did not play these last 2 weeks. So who knows what's going to happen there in Miami. But based on the report that the ownership there, Stephen Ross, is going to keep the head coach there, the one Mike McDaniel. So he seems to be safe. But is Hill going to be safe in all this? This will be an ongoing saga, I'm sure, once the playoffs and Super Bowl is played. So we'll wait to see what's going to happen there. And that is your playoff picture. And then last night, the Vikings had an attempt to get the 1 seed to be able to steal it on the last day of the season, considering that the Lions had played from in front all year. And even though the game was close early on, but the Lions were able to take over there, getting 2 touchdowns. Jamar Gibbs with a monster game, 31-9, as the Lions secure not only the NFC North, but also the NFC. As I discussed before, all roads will go through the Motor City if the Lions do happen to win that divisional game and move on from there. And that is your NFL Week 18. There isn't anything else I could add to that. And other than Tennessee getting the number 1 pick and they're on the clock for the draft there in the latter part of April, that's all I got. There isn't anything else to share. There isn't anything else to unpack. And that is just indicative of everything that I mentioned at the very top of this segment of how this NFL season is one to really forget. Now, can the playoffs give that an extra boost? Now, wildcard weekend has been, over the last 3 years, historically terrible. There isn't anything that you could glean over wildcard weekend over the last 3 years to think that, oh, wow, we should really have a big-time 6 games, 2 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, 1 on Monday night, that we could really say, all right, let's strap it in and let's see if we're going to have very high-octane, just riveting, engrossing, edge of your seat type football. history hasn't shown that. And who knows if that's going to be the case this coming weekend. I'll talk about the teams that are going to be playing and, of course, the matchups as far as the times, the days, etc. And you know what? Let me segue to that before I get to some off-the-field stuff. And one more time, come Thursday's podcast, I'll unpack all these storylines and preview all the games, give you predictions, etc. But here it is in order from Saturday afternoon 4:30 to Monday night at 8:15. Here are your matchups. The Chargers, they'll go to Houston to kick off Wild Card Weekend. Saturday there. And then the nightcap is Pittsburgh at Baltimore. 8 o'clock down in the Maryland, Baltimore. I was going to say, what do they call it? Chocolate City, I believe, is their moniker. So that's where you have, well, that's more DC, isn't it? Anyway, Pittsburgh at Baltimore is your 8:15, and that is the only divisional matchup that you're going to see. Two teams that are in the division, foes that are going to be in the postseason. And you're only going to have, right off the bat, 4 rematches from the regular season that are going to be played here in Wild Card Weekend. So Pittsburgh, Baltimore being one of them. One that is not is Denver at Buffalo, Sunday at 1. So the 7-seed Broncos, they'll play the 2-seed there up in Orchard Park. And then the remainder of the games are also rematches from the regular season. 4:30, Green Bay at Philadelphia. The Sunday night game, which I was a little bit surprised, Washington at Tampa. I thought maybe you'd flip-flop that. Maybe have Washington-Tampa be the 1 o'clock game. Have Denver-Buffalo the 4 o'clock game. And then Green Bay-Philadelphia, only because Green Bay is Green Bay. And then, although a small market, but then Philadelphia being a big market, because you know that the networks are going to rally around the markets. And although you have the nation's capital, but Tampa, but that is going to be your Sunday night game. Washington at Tampa, and then the Monday night wildcard weekend wrap-up is Minnesota at the Rams. And actually one of the 2 losses or 3 losses now, considering that they lost twice to Detroit, and the other loss that they've endured this year was in LA on a Thursday night. So let's see if they can exact some revenge, as the Vikings, with a 14-3 record, are a 5 seed, and their road to the Super Bowl will not be able to host a single home game. So that is your wrap-up there. Now, as far as news and notes, and I'll talk about some stuff that happened on the field first before I get to off the field. In particular, speaking of Green Bay, Jordan Love injured his right elbow, and Christian Watson injured that knee. I don't know if that was the same knee that he injured a few weeks back, where a lot of people thought that, is he going to be on the shelf for any time? I think that happened, what game was that? Was that no, it wasn't the game against Minnesota there just a week prior. Maybe the one before that. But anyway, be that as it may, 2 key components. Obviously, the quarterback, you cannot have him being absent here for a wild card matchup against the Eagles. And that comes full circle, especially for 2 of these matchups, because remember, in week 1, you had both Green Bay, Philadelphia, in Brazil, I might add, and then Washington, Tampa play also in week 1. So here it is for both of these teams that started the season. One of these 2 teams will end their season in this week 1 rematch. So keep that in mind as we get set for those games over the weekend. But Jordan Love, that's going to be a big question mark. I'm sure he's going to play. It seems from all indication that he's okay. Christian Watson, on the other hand, who knows? So we'll certainly keep an eye on what's going to happen there. And also what's been rather quiet, and I get it that it's not going to be maybe at the front or forefront of the news cycle in Philadelphia, but what's going on with Jalen Hurts? You haven't heard any latest updates with him. I'm sure come Tuesday or maybe even later today, when the coach meets up with the media on whether or not what is happening with the prognosis of a one Jalen Hurts, I'm sure he's probably going to be raring to go, and I would think will be cleared to play, considering he has not played in the last couple of games. But who knows? That was a hit there that he took on the turf of formerly FedEx Field there in Washington when they lost to the Commanders. But right at this very moment, who knows what his status is going to be, if he will suit up and take under center there against the Packers Sunday afternoon. And hopefully by the time we get to Thursday's podcast, we'll have more information. And of course, I'll be more than happy to share what is going to happen. But right now, it is a mystery on whether or not Jalen Hurts is going to be 100% for this game on Sunday. And then Black Monday, which is indicative of the day after the NFL regular season where coaches fall at the drop of a hat, and you didn't even get to Sunday evening, let alone Black Monday in New England, where Jarod Mayo fired after a 4-13 year, and granted that New England, they do not have the personnel. Now, they got the quarterback that they drafted in a one Drake May, which obviously that's a big thing. And they do have some skill position players, especially on offense, but they are very green, still very young. And defensively, although they have some very good schematics, but certainly they're not a team that is anything close or resembles with what Bill Belichick was working with there as far as even the recent vintage Super Bowl years of 51 and 53, even 49 for that matter. Forget about the days when they won the Super Bowls there in the early 2000s, but no semblance of defense there. But at the same time, for Mayo to get the axe, maybe it's a little bit premature, but the one thing I thought of once he got fired, quite possibly Mike Vrabel could be lurking in the shadows as the next New England Patriot coach. As if I'm Robert Kraft and the powers that be, I would have him with a limo riding up to One Patriot Way to sit down and have a long chat with them, if they haven't already done so, to see whether or not he'd be interested in taking that coaching position there. Of course, Vrabel being a former Patriot, winning Super Bowls during that first go-around when they won the first three there in the 2000s. And then you had Doug Pederson earlier today, axed by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, they're keeping the GM Trent Baalke, so Baalke gets to save his job, but with a draft choice, I believe in the top 3 or 4 at toe, and knowing that he gets a second life here, this is pretty much going to be it for him. Not necessarily this draft, but who knows? If things do not come up smelling roses this go around for Baalke, he probably has one more year. And again, if they don't get back to the playoffs, and if they do not have any success this forthcoming year with whomever the coach may be, then he'll be out on the rail there in Jacksonville as well. So those are the two coaches to think. A lot of people thought that maybe the GM Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, that is the GM and coach of the New York Giants, were going to be in any trouble, but that is not the case. Both have gotten the vote of confidence from the owner, John Mara, so they're going to stick around at least for one more year. So let's see, as the Giants are going to try to draft a quarterback in their own right, and I believe as of right now, they probably would be 4th or maybe 5th. I got to pull up where the draft order is for these teams. Obviously, that shifted a little bit, even with New England winning. But for the Giants, they're going to keep the GM and head coach for another year, so it's not as if they're going to bring in another face, because remember, the Giants have been a revolving door when it comes to head coaches, whether your name was Ben McAdoo, then they bring in Pat Shurmur, 2 years, he's out, then they bring in Joe Judge, 2 years, he's out, and now Daboll, after 3 years, remember, they made it to the postseason 2 years ago. Last year did not make it into the playoffs, and this year bottomed out with a terrible record. But for the Giants, let's see what they're going to be able to do this offseason, and it all starts with Shane and who they're going to draft. So we will certainly keep an eye on that as we get further down the road. And the Giants actually will pick 3rd because of that Patriot win there yesterday. And the Jaguars, they will pick 5th after the Pats. So it's Titans 1, Browns 2, Giants 3. So it looks like the Giants may get their quarterback. Although we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen in Cleveland, because there could be some talk about maybe Deshaun Watson getting waived and whatever is guaranteed money. I get it, they're going to take a dead cap hit in Cleveland, but who knows? Stranger things have happened. Maybe they'll say, you know what, we're just going to cut bait and eat that money. And it was just a terrible mistake on their part, which with your Jimmy Haslam, you know that you have not really planted your feet as an owner that is to be trusted, not only for an organizational standpoint, but also league-wide, as a guy that is reputable, as a guy that is going to do the right thing to get his team and organization on track, and we have not seen that there by Lake Erie, so who knows what's going to happen there this offseason. But I'm digressing here a little bit because now I'm talking about draft orders and things of that nature, but now we know what the top 5 are, and for the Jet fan, they're going to draft 7th. I just thought to throw that out there because with the way their season ended with a victory, where do they stand? Well, there you have it for the Jets. But other than that, that's what I have there with the NFL. There isn't anything else to really discuss or get into as far as what has taken place over these last few days. And now as we we'll march on and move from there. College football, all I have to say is Notre Dame, that's the one game that we could discuss because that was the one that was postponed with the horrific events there on New Year's Eve down on Bourbon Street. But now as we take a look ahead to the semifinals, and I think you have a very good one. But real quick, Notre Dame, where the game changed was late in that first half. It was 3-3. The Fighting Irish kicked the field goal. Then they got a strip sack there with literally seconds remaining by the Fighting Irish, stripping Gunnar Stockton, recovering the ball deep in Georgia territory, and that converted into a touchdown pass where the Irish were able to go up 13-3, and then to start the third quarter, what happens? They get a kickoff return for a touchdown, 20-3, although the Bulldogs did answer with a touchdown on the ensuing drive, but the Fighting Irish defense was stout. They were able to slow down that running game, and although Gunnar Stockton had a very good game and a surprising game considering that he's been a backup and you didn't know what to expect from him, I'm sure there wasn't a lot of film on Stockton, so therefore he did put up decent numbers. But obviously nothing that was anything to where they threatened the Fighting Irish with any type of comeback, because once they got that touchdown to make it 20-10, that's all they had left in their gas tank. So for Notre Dame, who at their good running game and with Riley Leonard just making a couple of plays, they were able to thwart whatever Georgia was going to throw at them. And now that they move on, and you're going to have an interesting matchup where they're going to play Penn State there on Friday, I believe. Let me just double check that. No, they're actually going to play Thursday because a lot of the talk was maybe flip-flopping the bowl games to where Ohio State, Texas would play Thursday just to give Notre Dame a bit of a blow considering that they had to have their game postponed. But Thursday it is, so they do get a full week off where Penn State has 9 days off. And I'll get into more of a preview and storylines even then because, right, why am I going to talk about that now knowing that not a game will be played until Thursday night where you'll have, again, Notre Dame and Penn State kick off then, and then on Friday, just the day after, Ohio State and Texas will, and that's also going to be both of these games are huge. And we know what's at stake, especially with Ohio State and what they've done here so far. But again, more storylines and previews will take place on Thursday's podcast, so you'll certainly will not want to miss that. And a couple of other news and notes in college football. You had Kurtis Roarke play with a torn ACL from what has been reported, not in the bowl game that they lost to Notre Dame, pretty much from the start of the year. How did this happen? How did they have this kid go out there and play a full season on a torn ACL is beyond me. And I get it. Maybe Kurtis Roarke will get the Tough Guy Award, or I don't even know what award you want to make up for him just playing a whole season and had a successful season at that, considering that they were 10-0 before losing late in the year to Ohio State and then having an opportunity to play in the postseason, although they performed terribly there against Notre Dame. But still, how did this kid play on a torn ACL throughout the whole year? And I don't want to hear that he was hurt after the fact. Yes, it does make for an intriguing storyline. Yes, it does make for mind-blowing, like, wow, how did he do it? And really to put that kid in danger throughout the course of the season, I don't know if that's negligence on Indiana's part. And you kind of wonder if they had a 7-5 season, would he have played the whole year? Probably not. But because they got off to that great start and actually had a chance to get into the postseason, that they probably thought, let's just ride this out. But that, I don't know. That, to me, that's a little irresponsible if you ask me. But if the kid said, I don't care, wrap me up, shoot me up, whatever it is, just to not be able to have to sit out a whole year and maybe increase his stock as far as making it into the NFL draft. I don't know if he's eligible to come out. I don't know if he's a sophomore. I haven't followed Indiana football that closely, even with the game that was played there 2.5 weeks ago. But for Kurtis Roarke, listen, he looks like a superhero by him playing a whole season on a bum knee. That's all there is to it. And speaking of which, I know the Michigan quarterback, Davis Warren, had torn his ACL there in the bowl game against Alabama. So obviously he didn't go a whole season without being injured until he got to that bowl game. So he is one that had also had come out and reported that. So I just thought to throw that in the mix. And then some very sad, just terrible news. And not even just to what had taken place there on New Year's Eve down in New Orleans, but also the father of Georgia coach Kirby Smart, Sonny Smart, had fallen walking downtown or maybe somewhere near prior to the events of what took place there that evening. He fell, had to be hospitalized with a hip injury, and then while surgery was being performed, I don't think this happened during surgery, maybe it was afterwards, whatever complications that arose from this surgery, Sonny Smart had died because of this fall. And at 76 years of age, I mean, you can't even wrap your head around, if you're Kirby, the Smart family, etc., to think that on the day of what your game should have taken place, and then he falls, injures himself, has to be rushed to the hospital, and then goes through surgery. I believe surgery was completed. It was what happened afterwards. And then I believe right before the game on Thursday, or maybe it was right after, passes away. I mean, you can't even fathom that. Just a terrible story, awful story. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Smart family, to Georgia, etc. I mean, just terrible to even read that he had suffered this fall on the last day of the year. You're going into a new year, and then to couple the fact that the Bulldogs lost the game, and I don't know, maybe there was some, and not even some, a lot that was over the head and carrying the weight of what had taken place there for Kirby Smart. I'm sure his head wasn't even in the game, and I don't want to just blame their performance. Now, mind you, it was going to be 6-3 going into the half, so it's not as if Georgia had no shot to win this game, but it must have been with a heavy heart and just a lot of thoughts where Kirby Smart, although was on the field and there physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually wasn't, based on what happened there with his dad. So once again, I just have to send my thoughts and condolences to the Smart family on just a, no way to slice it, just a horrific story there down in New Orleans. All right, now let me turn my attention as I take off the helmet and shoulder pads and put on the high tops. NBA is now going to take place and take court as I squeak up and down the hardwood. And what more can be said here over the last couple of days, if you're a Miami Heat fan, my guy, Brian Murray, the only one that I know is a diehard Heat fan, and maybe Jessica, another friend of mine, Muriel, I believe is her last name, so I'll give her a shout out. But Jimmy Butler, press conference the other day, coming out saying, and I even talked about this on Thursday's podcast, to where he had come out, and excuse me, I had to get that cough out, something right there lodged in the throat, to where Butler was happy off the court, not happy on the court, and he felt as if he wasn't playing because he didn't have, or he was playing, but wasn't playing to the way Jimmy Butler has played in his 5+ years in a Miami Heat uniform. And when asked, he goes, "Oh, you feel that you can't do that here?" And he said, "Yeah, probably not." Or that you can do that here, and I'm paraphrasing, of course. And for the front office of the Heat, obviously Pat Riley had come out and they suspended Jimmy Butler 7 games for conduct detrimental to the team. And with this 7-day holding pattern that he's in, which started Saturday night where they got blown out by the Utah Jazz at home, and now they're on a long road trip out west. Now you have a scenario where they're going to have to look at this 7-game stretch, or now 6-game stretch, to see whether or not they could get a buyer for one Jimmy Butler. And here it is twofold. I'm going to say this right out the gate. One, Jimmy Butler has already pulled the NBA player empowerment card, to where he has now forced the team to see whether or not he could trade him. And Butler, what does he have left at the age of 35? I mean, let's face it. Butler, very good player. A lot of people could argue he's a top 15 player in the sport, and maybe even top 10 for those who are really going to break out the pom-poms. To me, he is not that. He is a guy that certainly has a lot of heart, a lot of grit, a lot of toughness, and has had moments in this league where he's put up big numbers. I mean, there's no denying that. But Butler is not Giannis Antetokounmpo. He is not Luka Doncic. He is not Nikola Jokic. He is not Jason Tatum. He is not Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He is not Anthony Edwards. He is not, I mean, we go through a lot of these players in the league. And I can come up with probably 20 players. You can even say LeBron for that matter at 40 years of age. I can come up with easily 15 players off the top of my head who are better than Jimmy Butler. And at the age of 35, how much does he have left? And I get it that let's say if he does go to Denver or Phoenix or Golden State, the teams that he had on his list that he preferred to go to, that yes, I'm sure he'll have a burst of energy, he'll be reinvigorated, and you may see the Jimmy Butler of old. But, A, will you see that? B, I get it that he's going to be on his best behavior because he's going into a final year of a contract. He does have a player option for next year, which you know he's going to decline, so he can try to get his last big payday in his career, considering that he's approaching age 36. And obviously, once you get to age 38, you can only make a certain amount. So there is a ceiling there for Butler. But even with that, do you trust him fully, considering what happened during his days in Chicago, and especially what happened there in Minnesota, which brokered a trade to Philadelphia? And I understand that wasn't all his fault because he was there for half a year, but Philadelphia said, we'd rather re-sign Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris and guys like that as opposed to taking Butler on their team. So that's where Butler jettisoned to South Florida to be a part of the Heat team that now, all of a sudden, because his heart isn't into it, maybe it's because he looks at the Heat culture and maybe he's just done with that. He doesn't want to have to feel like he has to be 100% part of that whole Heat machine, and therefore said, I want out. Well, he got his wish because with Riley suspending him and now trying to see if he could get a trade for Butler to go elsewhere. But now here is even the bigger kicker in all this. Not only does he have his list, but with that being said, there's going to have to be multiple teams involved because you have so much that's going on. You have apron issues when it comes to salary cap, second apron, and I can break that down, but it's going to take a lot of time here because with the new CBA and the second apron, you can only have a couple of players that's going to make a ton of money, and then after that, you pretty much are going to spread yourself thin. Take a look at the Celtics. You're going to have two players that are going to make well over $60 million, so they already have that second apron, so therefore, the guys that they already have paid, whether it's Drew Holiday and Derek White, and etc., at some point, they're going to have to pair with those guys because that second apron, once it kicks in, which I believe is going to be after this season, how they're going to do that is beyond me. So for Butler to go somewhere else, especially at that money that he's going to be making this year, he can't go to a team, let's say like Phoenix, for instance, because Phoenix already has big-time salaries, whether your name is Bradley Beal, which the Heat already said they do not want, Devin Booker, or even Kevin Durant for that matter, so they can't add on another apron, and I guess I did explain that here in the last couple of minutes, but to further delve into it, just Google it and you'll see for yourself. But with that said, they're going to need more than one team in order for, whether it's even Golden State for that matter, with Curry and even Draymond that are making a ton of money. And Denver, where you have guys like Nikola Jokic and even Jamal Murray that are also making close to max contract money. Or in Jokic's case, he's making max money. So you bring in Butler there, you have to send Murray back, but I don't even know if that's going to be possible or even if the Nuggets would do that. So that's where it gets tricky, and that's why this isn't an automatic shoo-in for Butler to get his wish to go to those preferred destinations. So now you have a quandary if you're Pat Riley, because it's not as if you could just trade him somewhere and get assets back because he's in the middle of, in essence, a final year of a contract to where you're not going to get big-time draft capital or maybe even a big-time NBA player. You may get a big-time NBA player, but you're going to have to also get an expiring contract coming back your way. So in essence, another headache. It's not as if you're going to get a young talent. You're not going to get a guy that is on the come up because Butler's 35, so you're going to get something equivalent to that. So if you're the Miami Heat, it's almost as if, what the hell do you do? And I don't know. You're going to have to be very creative, and if there's anybody in the league that could do that, it is Pat Riley, in order for him to pull off, in essence, what's going to be an inside straight if you're playing poker, and I'm not a poker guy to say the least, or have a royal flush for that matter, but the Heat right now are just in a pickle to see what they're going to do to try to get Butler off the team, and also how they're going to do it, considering all those permutations that I just detailed. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that and to see where that's going to go over the next couple of weeks. But right now, if you're the Miami Heat and especially a fan of the Heat, you think it's going to be that simple to get rid of Butler? Now watch, they trade for him today and it's a quick snap and a hop, skip, and jump for Butler, and it's going to make me look foolish, but I don't know. To me, this saga is far from over. And with that being said, NBA having a lot of injuries here also on top of this, and also one return, which I'll get into. As far as injuries go, John Morant, I didn't talk about this on Thursday, week to week with that shoulder sprain that he hurt. I believe he has a AC joint. So I don't know how severe that is. It's grade 1, so I don't think it's too severe. So that's why they're taking it week by week. But we know that Morant has had these injuries over the years, and including a shoulder, which I believe didn't that thrown his year last year. So with Morant out, that's obviously a very significant loss for a Memphis team that's actually played pretty well in his absence. So despite the fact that Morant, as we all know, when healthy, one of the top players in the sport, but has had his issues, as we all know, off the court and his injuries as well last year. But Memphis, you got to give it up. They have played pretty well despite a 2-game losing streak here, but just a half game behind the Rockets in the Western Conference, who currently have the 2 seed, and OKC, who is just flying high. And I'll get to them in a minute when we go through the league, but the Thunder right now are looking like the team to beat in the NBA overall. Other injury notes, I know Jaden Ivey, and give it up for the Pistons. The Pistons have played very well here. You have to give them credit. They're ranked in the 7 through 10 range, and this is a team that, remember, last year lost how many games in a row? 23, 25, 26, where Monty Williams was the coach. Well, not the case this go around because the Pistons have played very well. They've overachieved, and even with Anthony Edwards getting his career high, I believe, over the weekend, at 53 points against Detroit, Cade Cunningham and company said, not us. He actually scored 40 in that victory over Minnesota. And the T-Wolves have hit the skids here to where they're now at 500 at the bottom of the bracket from the 7 through 10 range. And the T-Wolves, who had a big year last year, as we all know, right now are floundering. So back to the injuries. Jaden Ivey, a young guard there who has performed very well, 18 points a game, had suffered a terrible leg injury, a broken fibula. He may miss the rest of the regular season, so we'll have to wait and see on that, as he got dove into his leg by Cole Anthony in a game against Orlando. And it was an accident, nothing malicious or with any intent. But for Ivy, he's going to be out. So let's see where the Pistons pick up the pieces to try to continue their good season. And I get it, they're 17 and 18 right now. People say, oh, come on, Pistons aren't going to be anything of note here in the NBA Eastern Conference. Well, considering where they were last year and what they've done this year, it's been a pretty big turnaround. So have to keep that in mind there if you're following the league. Jonathan Kuminga is now out 3 weeks with an ankle, and that's another significant loss for a Golden State team that has been scuffling here after a torrid start, as I've talked about before over the last few weeks here on the podcast. And then let's roll out the red carpet. Let's get the drums. Let's get the band. Let's get whatever it may be. Kawhi Leonard has played his first game in the NBA this year after missing 34 games with that cranky knee that never seems to heal. 12 points, 3 for 5 from 3, 4 from 11 for the game. Pedestrian game. Obviously shot well from behind the arc, but for the longtime Clipper who is out of the lineup more than in, let's see if there's going to be any consistency as far as him playing. And remember, he played a ton of games last year before he got hurt there, I believe in Game 3 against the Dallas Mavericks in the opening round of the NBA playoffs. But for a new arena and for a guy who got his extension, and we've killed Kawhi Leonard in the past, he being the poster boy of load management. And yes, this knee injury that never seems to go away. And Lord knows he's had chronic knee issues on both of them for that matter. But this right one, for whatever the reason, has certainly not cooperated and has not gotten his NBA career on track there, especially in a Clipper uniform. So let's see if he's going to be more in the lineup than out of it. And I'm sure if they're playing tonight, and we'll take a look at the schedule in a minute, who knows if he's going to suit up and play, because as we all know, he dances to his own beat. But that's what you have there. And then Jamari Smith, that's another guy I forgot to mention. The forward there, the Rockets, he's going to be out 48 weeks where he suffered a fractured hand during a shoot-around prior to a game. So Smith, another guy that's going to be out, and that's also a good young nucleus there, led by, of course, Jalen Green, as well as the other Sengun, who's another good young player. So you have that scenario going down in Houston. As I mentioned, a 2 seed in the Western Conference. And let me pull up the conferences as I go through the leagues. Now, let's face it, Oklahoma City, and they beat the Celtics there yesterday, and the Celtics came in a little bit hot. They won in Minnesota there on Thursday night. They won in Houston on Friday. And then in an afternoon tilt against the Oklahoma City Thunder, they were no match. The Thunder continue to roll. They're 1 by 13, playing well, fast and loose. And all I can say is this. OKC is obviously going to be a team to be reckoned with, especially what they did in the regular season last year. They got a 1 seed, as you know, before they lost to Dallas in the conference semis. But this is a team that, unless the injury bug hits them big time or they haven't learned from their lessons last year, not only throughout the regular season, but in the postseason, getting bounced in the second round, this is going to be a big-time team. I picked them to go to a final this year. Did I pick them to start off their season 30-5? Absolutely not, as they are in the middle of that 15-game winning streak. But kudos to the coach, Mike Daigneault. Kudos to what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has blossomed and turned into. Right now, you could argue whether or not MVP, and I talked about that a little bit on Thursday's podcast based on what Anthony Edwards said. So for all that, there's still plenty of basketball to be played. Think about it. 35, they still have 47 games to go. But boy, Oklahoma City right now is the talk of the league based on what they've done here over the first course as they approach the first half of this season. Now, also throughout the league, we know about the Cavaliers. They could say, hey, what about us? Now they've won 10 in a row. And remember, the Cavaliers started their year 15-0 when the Celtics beat them and handed their first loss to them this season. So now you have a 10-game winning streak, bookended by a 15-game winning streak to start the year. And even though 30-5, I get it, that is a tremendous start. And they have as good of a record. But with Cleveland, the reason why I am not sold on them, and I know this is kind of foul to say because your record is what your record is, right? 31-4. And here I am talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder. But the thing about the Cavaliers that would scare me, despite the fact that they've overachieved, despite the fact that Kenny Atkinson is a very underrated and just good X's and O's type of coach. But the Cavaliers, I look at this team and I say to myself, if you're able to slow down their backcourt, Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and we get it that Mitchell is a guy that has played in big-time games. Granted, he has not had a lot of success of length in a postseason, and maybe this could be the year, but I don't know. I'm just not sold on this team despite the fact of their record. Now, people could say, well, JAYREELZ, why are you sold on Oklahoma City and not sold on the Cavaliers? Well, the Cavaliers now, as big as they've looked here in this season and do boast a better record than Oklahoma City, but just like I mentioned, Oklahoma City, at least we've seen a bit of a canvas. We saw last year them having a 1 seed, and we saw them get bounced in the second round. I get it, but guess what? Cleveland got bounced in the second round as well, and they were part of the 4 or 5 seed. So even if Cleveland does come back to the pack, and right now they have a 6-loss and 5.5 game lead ahead of the Celtics in the division, or in the conference, I should say. And to me, despite how well they played, I just don't trust them 100%. And we've seen this with teams. Remember the Atlanta Hawks in 2015? They had the 1 seed and were tops in the Eastern Conference. And what happened? They went to a conference final, but they got swept by the Cavs. And I'm not trying to compare the fate of the Cavaliers that's going to be similar to the Atlanta Hawks, but did anybody take them seriously? No. And I have to say the same for Cleveland here. Now, we know they have big-time players, and they have a big-time front court as well. And they have a pretty good bench to top it all off. But I still need to see more, as crazy as that may sound. And what I mean by more is them getting into the muck of series against Boston, or the likes of even the Knicks for that matter, because remember, the Knicks beat them 2 years ago in the first round, and in 5 games. And right, I'm not trying to make the Knicks out to be the Patrick Ewing or even go back to yesteryear, Willis Reed, Walt Frazier Knicks, but I still need to see more. I'm calling it like I see it. I'm not a big believer. More of a believer in OKC than I am in Cleveland. So for that, rest of the Eastern Conference, pretty much the same. Western Conference, I have to say as well, although the Lakers now are starting to climb up a little bit, 5th seed there in the conference. Phoenix is still, boy, the Suns. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll trade. I don't know what they're going to do there. And I had a feeling, some told me they were going to have a down year. And even though after that 9-2 start, I was thinking to myself, ooh, I don't know what's going to happen. But similar to what the Rangers, not to compare different sports, but the Rangers, remember they got off to that 9-2 start and they played poorly since? Mind you that the Rangers have won 2 of the last 3. But after that 9-2 start by the Suns, you know what their record is? 6-16. Terrible, to say the least. So who knows? Getting Kevin Durant there to the Valley of the Sun certainly has not boded well if you're Matt Ishbia thinking that he was going to be the panacea of all ills to try to get a Phoenix Sun team back to a championship round. We all know what happened there 3 years ago when they lost to the Bucks, but it is not looking good there in the desert if you're a Suns fan. But other than that, that's pretty much it. That's what you got there with the NBA. As far as the schedule this week, let's take a peek for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Tonight, Phoenix and Philadelphia. Orlando at the Knicks. Good game there. Clippers in Minnesota. Dallas at Memphis. Good game there. That's what you have tonight. Rest of the week, Lakers in Dallas. Boston at Denver. That'll be your TNT game. Lakers-Dallas is the first game, followed by Boston-Denver. And then Wednesday, oh, there you go, people. You're going to see firsthand, right now, everything that I talked about, Oklahoma City, Cleveland, 7 o'clock, ESPN, Wednesday. So you're going to have a clash of the Titans there in Cleveland between the top 2 teams in the sport. So, you know what? I get it. OKC and Cleveland isn't LA, Boston, isn't anything where you could really say, all right, wow, you know, Milwaukee or Phoenix, or, you know, or LA, a big market team. But if you're a very good to good or diehard NBA fan, I'm sure a lot of people are going to clue in on that. And you do have San Antonio and Milwaukee. That is your nightcap on your ESPN doubleheader on Wednesday. And then you have LA and Denver. The Clippers, that is, are going to play in the Mile High City. Other than that, that's what you have for your NBA here this week. Now as I lace up my skates to go through the NHL, National Hockey League, and really the only thing of note to get into is Alexander Ovechkin. Now he got a goal there on Thursday night against the Minnesota Wild and then scored against the Rangers there as they won on Saturday afternoon. And now he is just 23 goals away from Wayne Gretzky, surpassing him all time on the list for goals scored in a career. And Ovechkin has not missed a beat. It's not as if he's been back for a week and a half, and he came back, what was it, 9 days ago in Toronto where he got an empty net goal, and then the next day he scored a goal against Detroit. And since then, 2 more goals. So he's gotten 4 goals in his return, and certainly on pace to break Wayne Gretzky. I don't know the target date, but I know it's sometime in late March. And what more can you say about Ovechkin and what he's done here? Now, will he continue this onslaught here to see if he could get the record this year, which I think would be good for the league to do it next year? You don't want to have to put him on ice going into next year, even if he is just a handful of goals away. So we'll take a look at what Ovechkin has in front of him as far as the schedule goes, but 23 goals away, which is a record that nobody in any right frame of mind thought that this was going to be achievable. And Ovechkin, he's only the 3rd player in history with 800 goals, and now is 23 away. And as long as I've been alive, and I've seen Wayne Gretzky perform and watched him play throughout the course of his career, and to know that that was a record at 894 was going to stand the test of time. Well, right now, the grade 8 Alexander Ovechkin is that close from breaking it. So I'll be on top of that. But other than that, the NHL has been rather quiet. We talked about the Winter Classic Day the other day. Wasn't much to really uncover there. The league on the whole, let me see what we got before I get to the schedule. Maple Leafs have played well here as they've overtaken the Atlantic over the Panthers. Capitals, 4-game lead over the Devils. As we discussed, the Devils have hit a little bit of a slide here. And remember, the Devils, because of those 2 games early on this season when they had that opening series against the Sabres in Czech Republic, they have a lot of teams in their division have a 2 or 3 game in hand where the Devils now, although have a disadvantage because of those games that they played early on this year, and with the Capitals 4 points ahead of them and 3 games in hand, that's a significant stretch there, or significant distance or disparaging of the 2 teams, disparity, as I get my words together here, JAYREELZ, wake up. So you have that going on there with the Caps as they continue to play well. And in fact, the Caps do not have the most points in the sport. That goes to the Vegas Golden Knights as of right this moment. 6-point lead over LA and Edmonton in the division. And all 3 of those teams have actually played pretty well. And then you have the Stars, who have now made a little bit of resurgence. Winners of 4 in a row as they try to inch closer in the Central Division. They're 5 points behind the Wild, and the Wild are 2 points behind the Winnipeg Jets in the Western Conference, or in the Central Division out in that conference. And that's it, as a lot of teams, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've had a little bit more than a handful of teams either are at or just a smidge past the halfway point of the NHL season already. I mean, think about that, people. Here we are, early January, and the halfway point has come. Now, when we get to Thursday, and for sure next Monday, we'll be past the halfway point. So, we will continue to monitor what's going on here. And not only just the NHL, but of course the association as we get into the NFL playoffs. That's going to be the bulk, and as well as the college football playoff. But the winter sports there, obviously, are going to take a backseat to what's going to transpire here with what's going to happen on the gridiron. But, as always, I'm going to be over it. And then finally, with the baseball, as I get into the batter's box, where in roughly 6 weeks, count them, people, pitchers and catchers will report. And it is early to start envisioning the green grass, the smell of the hot dogs, and even visions of opening day dancing in our heads. No, we're still a ways to go from that. But 6 weeks is not far off for pitchers and catchers. And you still have those big free agents out there. You know the names. And the Alex Bregmans of the world. And guys who are still looking to see if they can secure a contract. In order, Pete Alonso, another one, in order for them to get to spring training, hopefully on time, where the veteran players will report just days after the pitchers and catchers will do so. But you did have a couple of moves where nothing much to really get crazy about, but the Orioles, remember I talked about them last week with Corbin Burns going to Arizona, and what the Orioles have not done as they pretty much stood pat up until now. When you sign a 41-year-old pitcher who, mind you, he's thrown a ton of innings over the last 4 years, more than a lot of pitchers in the sport, but really, you're going to go dig that deep into the bargain bin to pull out Charlie Morton? Listen, he's a guy that's had a long career, 17 years, had success, won World Series, played on big-time teams. And for Morton, I'm sure he's going to bring a veteran presence there, but could you really expect a lot out of a guy who's 41, who I believe his record last year was 8-10? Did strike out a lot of batters in 170-some-odd innings, but where are you going to pencil in Morton? Is he going to be your number 2 starter after Grayson Rodriguez? Because you'd have to anoint Rodriguez to be your number 1 guy, right? So, okay, that's a good move if you're a team that has a few starters and maybe you pencil him as a 4th or 5th. But if you're going to really bank on this guy to have any success and to put this team in the right direction to get back on the beam to maybe win another AL East or get into the postseason, that is a bit of a stretch. So kudos to the Orioles for doing that, but obviously they need to do more considering what the Yankees and even the Red Sox with their rotation, what they've done to do to upgrade that over the last month or so. And then you had Cavan Biggio, a guy who was on the Toronto Blue Jays last year before getting traded to the Dodgers, and then he was on his odyssey to San Francisco, to Atlanta over the last couple of months of the season. He signs a minor league contract with Kansas City, and the only reason why I bring him up, obviously he was part of the team in Toronto with a lot of former players, them being their dads, whether your name is Vladimir Guerrero or even Bo Bichette's dad Dante, and then you had Cavan Biggio, where his father Craig. Well, now, if you're wondering where he ends up, he's in Kansas City. And let's see if he makes it to the major league team when it's all said and done. So, not a big time name, but of course people who follow the sport know who he is. So that's where he ends up, is a member of the Royals who tried to build off of their year last year where they made it into the postseason, won a round, beating the Orioles before losing to the Yankees there in the divisional series. Other than that, that's what I got, people. Another episode in the books as we get 2025 off and running, and a big year to boot. I got a lot cooking, people. Stay tuned to the podcast, Apple, Spotify, of course, the YouTube channel. Stay tuned to that because I definitely put up a lot of shorts on a daily basis, and I have a video that's been going viral, and I also have a vlog that's forthcoming too, so stay tuned for that at JAYREELZ on the YouTube channel. So please, keep your finger on the pulse on all those platforms to be abreast of what's going to happen, not only with yours truly, with the podcast, and what I have lined up here in the weeks and months to come, because yes, and my fingers are crossed, I can't announce this yet, but I have a big time, let's just say a big time podcast that is in the works for an anniversary that I'm hoping will be epic, but I will announce it hopefully by the end of this month and for sure the start of next month, because if this is going to take place, or the scope of this will take place in the early part of March. So stay tuned for that, people. You won't want to miss out. And if you have a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following. Hit me up on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number, or the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I like to say. Talking sports since birth, doing what it is that I love as an independent content creator, working full-time, people. All right, so keep that in mind. And I also got a couple of other platforms that I'm working with that I will share with you as well over the course of this next week, that I'm working behind the scenes and actually resuscitating, because I pretty much had left it for dead. But keep in mind for that one as well, because where else are you going to find everything that I discussed here in one podcast, a little bit over an hour? Nowhere. I'm listening, people. I'm still listening. And you know I'm working behind the scenes to put forth a great product, to put forth a credible product, an entertaining product, an informative one that is nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.